بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. In the last lesson, we looked at the migration, hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Medina, and so at this stage in the seerah, we change from the situation in Mecca, which was hostile, difficult. The Muslims were unable to proclaim, make idhar of the religion without being harmed, without being oppressed, without being tortured, without being killed. And so the hijrah marks a new era, a new period in the life of the Muslims. And so we're going to begin looking at some of the actions of the Prophet ﷺ when he reached Medina. But before we do that, we should be aware in our minds of the different stages in life in Medina. There are 3 stages in the period in Medina. And so the first of those stages is when the mushrikun, because they realized the Muslims had escaped from their clutches and had emigrated to Medina, they realized that this was a dangerous situation for them, because the Muslims, being outside of their vision, outside of their observation, they were able to group together and to organize and arrange their affairs, and this was a threat to the mushrikun. So for the first 6 years in Medina, this is the period in which the mushrikeen, they were hostile, they organized wars, battles, campaigns, and so the first 6 years there were waves of hostility, and they tried to wipe out the Muslim community. Now, this is the first period. The second period is for 2 years, and in these 2 years there were treaties, there were agreements and covenants that were made with the mushrikun, with the leaders of the mushrikun, like a truce basically. And in this period as well, in this period of truce where there was no fighting, the Prophet ﷺ was inviting the kings around Arabia and beyond to enter into the fold of Islam. Right, so this is a period of 2 years after the first 6 years. And then the final just over 2 years, 2 to 3 years, we see that people from all different places, they began to accept Islam. Many delegations would come from different places. There would be Christians, there would be, and they would come and they would accept Islam, and the Prophet would teach them, would inform them, and would educate them. And so many large delegations began to come towards the end of the period in Medina. These are the 3 time periods that we need to keep in mind when we look at the life in Medina. On top of this as well, we have to keep in mind the different groups of people that existed in Medina, because in Mecca it was largely the mushrikun, the pagans, the polytheists. And we saw through the verses in the Quran the different types of arguments and discussions that took place on issues of tawheed, on issues of resurrection, on issues of prophethood. Was the Prophet a prophet? These issues took place between the mushrikun and between the Prophet ﷺ. Now that we come to Medina, we have a slightly different environment. And in this environment, there were three main groups that we need to keep a track of. So the first of those groups are, of course, the Muslims who emigrated, the Muhajirin, and likewise the Ansar from Medina itself. And so they were his companions, and this was the first major group. And from them, the Prophet found helpers who helped and aided the Prophet ﷺ and gave him a refuge. And so the Muhajirun and the Ansar were the Muslims, and their numbers were increasing day by day. They were increasing day by day. The second group were those who were the pure mushrikun, the polytheists. And they were mainly of two different groups, al-Khazraj and al-Aws. They were the two main groups of the polytheists. These two groups had been involved in wars for a long period. They were always involved in fighting with each other. So when the Prophet ﷺ came, the people, obviously this now changed the situation for these tribes, the Khaws and the Azraj. And the third group were the Yahud. And these were Yahud who had come from the Hijaz. They came to the Hijaz from Syria, because in that time there were things taking place between nations, between the Byzantines, between the Assyrians, and so wars and things of that nature. So the Jews, they migrated, they left and they came south, and they came into the place known as Yathrib. And they had become like Arabs. So they would dress like Arabs, their, even marriages amongst the Arabs. And so it kind of became mixed in terms of the lineage. But they would boast about their lineage, their Jewish lineage. And they would say to the Arabs, because they were expecting a prophet, because in the Torah it is mentioned that there will be a prophet and he will be from such and such a place. And we find there is a mention of certain places in the Torah. Bakka, for example, is mentioned which is the old name of Makkah. Likewise, it says the sons of Kedar, which is referring to certain tribes, Arabian tribes, and likewise it mentions Arabia as well. So this was in the knowledge of the Yahud, and so many of them, they came in that area because they were expecting a prophet and a leader, and they would boast to the Arabs. So the Aws and the Khazraj, they would say that when our leader comes, we will rule over you. He will lead us and we will dominate you. They would boast to the Arabs like this. So this was the third group of people who were present in Medina. There were three well-known tribes. There were many tribes of the Yahud, but the three most famous known tribes are Banu Qaynuqa, and they used to be allies of al-Khazraj. And there was also Banu an-Nadir, and also Banu Qurayza, and they would be allied with al-Aws. Right? So some of them would be allies to al-Aws, they would support them in their wars, and others would be the allies of al-Khazraj and support them in their wars as well. Now, when the Prophet, when he came to Medina, you can imagine that the Muslim community is growing and expanding, and so this now has implications for these people. For the polytheists, number one, because they have connections to the Quraysh of Mecca, number one. Secondly, to the Yahud, and the Yahud fear a change in their circumstances, in their financial circumstances, and other issues as well. So because of that, you can see that the open hostility that was present in Mecca is no longer present, but it took on a different form and a different shape. And this is what we will be discussing, inshallah ta'ala, in the lessons to come, to see how the change in environment, how it altered the type of opposition and the type of problems and the type of tribulations that came to the Prophet ﷺ in the period in Medina. This is where we see the appearance of nifaq. Nifaq was not present in Mecca because everything was open. The kufr was open, but here in Medina, where the Muslims had strength, this is now the period where we see nifaq and the munafiqeen appearing and creating their problems. So we're going to start looking at different events that took place. So from the first of those events that took place is al-Masjid al-Nabawi, the very first masjid in Medina. So when the Prophet, when he came to Medina, he began to arrange affairs, to organize the affairs, both in terms of the deen, religiously, and also in terms of the dunya, in terms of the worldly affairs. And alongside that, he continued making da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first major event is al-Masjid al-Nabawi, which is the very first mosque And this is in fact the mosque in Quba, Masjid al-Quba, Masjid Quba. So he says the first step that was taken in this path was to make the prophetic mosque. And for this, a land was purchased. This was a place where his camel stopped, if you remember from the previous lesson. When he came to Medina, to the outskirts of Medina, and he followed where the camel stopped. And that land that was there, it used to belong to two orphans. And so he bought this land. It was 100 yards by 100 yards, 100 square yards. And in this land, there were the graves of the mushrikeen. You know, there were trees and shrubs and plants, and the whole thing had become overgrown. So all of that was cleared. The trees were cut, and the trees were cut and removed. And so the qibla of the masjid was made, which at that time was towards Jerusalem. And the foundations were laid downwards to about 3 arm spans. And the walls were made from plaster and from clay. And likewise the pillars were made from pebbles and stones. And the roof was made by way of the reed, strips that you see from some of the plants. And the qibla was towards Bayt al-Maqdis. And the Prophet ﷺ used to have the stones and the plaster brought by way of the Muhajirun and the Ansar. They would bring it, and they were very active and very zealous in building this masjid. Now, by the side of this masjid, the Prophet he also built 2 small apartments made out of stones and the plaster as well. And they were for his wives at the time. The first was Sauda, and the second was Aisha. They were the only 2 wives he had at this particular point in time. And so these 2 places were built by the side of the masjid where the Prophet would reside. That's the first major event. The second major event connected to ibadah is the legislation of the Adhan. The Adhan, which is the call to prayer. Once the mosque was established, the Muslims began to attend the prayers in Jama'ah, and sometimes some of them would delay, and sometimes some of them would be early. So the time wasn't exact. So some of the Muslims, they advised, the Prophet he sought a consultation with some of the Muslims, and they sought of some way, how can we find a way by which to notify the Muslims of the time for prayer? So some of them said that maybe a fire should be lit so that it can be seen, the smoke can be seen from all directions. Others said that maybe we can blow into a horn. Others said that maybe we can strike something made of metal so the sound, like a tambourine or something of that nature. So Umar bin al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, he said, why don't we take a man and put him out there and make him call the people to the salah? And the Prophet he accepted this advice, and so he chose a man and he acted upon this. And then it happened later that a companion by the name of Abdullah bin Zayd bin Abdi Rabbihi al-Ansari, that he saw in his dream the adhan, the words for the adhan being said. So then he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said that I saw in the adhan such and such, and he meant in the ru'ya, in the dream, such and such, the adhan. So he told the Prophet ﷺ, and he then ordered him to go to Bilal and to ask him to call by the same adhan that he had seen in the dream. Why? Because Bilal was very powerful in his voice. So then when Bilal gave the adhan, Umar bin al-Khattab, he heard the adhan and he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Wallahi, I've seen the likes of this. So in other words, he had the same dream as well. So this now is confirmation that the ru'ya that was true for the first companion, Umar bin al-Khattab, he came and he confirmed it. So from here, the adhan became legislated and it became one of the symbols of the Muslims and of Islam. The third thing that took place, so we have the masjid, we have the adhan, and the third thing that took place, the major thing, is that the Prophet ﷺ, he made friendship between the Muhajirun and the Ansar, to tie the ties of brotherhood and Islam between the Muhajirun and the Ansar. Now the Ansar, one of their qualities was that they were very noble, very generous, and they would compete with each other in donating to the Muhajirin and to make them as guests in their homes. That's why we see in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions about the Ansar in Surah Al-Hashr. He says, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ حَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً مِمَّا أُوتُوا وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. Which means, mentioned the rough meaning basically is that the Ansar, that they love those who made emigration to them. They don't find in their hearts any want or need, but they give preference to those, meaning the Muhajirin, over themselves, even though they themselves are the ones in need. Now, this is from the great qualities of the Ansar. So the Prophet ﷺ, he increased the love between the Ansar and the Muhajirun by making them as brothers. So he took every person from the Muhajirun and he made him to be an actual brother with a person from the Ansar. And he made them to inherit from each other. And after this ruling of inheritance was abrogated, but the issue of brotherhood remained. And all of this was agreed and decreed in the house of Anas bin Malik radiyallahu anhu wa anhum ajma'in, and upon all of the companions. So one of the Ansar, to show you the love of the Ansar, one of the Ansar, he came and they came and they said to the Prophet that we will take all of the dates that we have and we will present them and you can divide them into two. Half we will keep and half we will give to the Muhajirin. But the Prophet, he saw that this was going to be very burdensome upon the Ansar. So he said, he didn't accept this. And then so they said, basically what we'll do then is our orchards, we will work together with the Muhajirin, our brothers, we'll work together, we will work the orchards, and as for the produce, we will split that in half between ourselves. And so the Prophet, he accepted this proposition, and in this manner, the Muhajirun and the Ansar, they worked together to work the land, to work the orchards, in order to make their livelihood and their rizq. Now, to give you an illustration of how noble were the companions and how determined they were, one of the Ansar, he was called Sa'ad bin al-Rabi'. He was the richest person from amongst the Ansar, or one of the richest person from the Ansar. He said to the one who from the Muhajirin who had been made a brother to him, because everyone from the Ansar had been given or made a brother from the Muhajirun, and his brother was Abdurrahman bin Auf. So he said to him, all of my wealth that you see, I'm going to split it into two, and my two wives, I have two wives, choose the better one of the two, the more beautiful one of the two. I will divorce her, and after her iddah has finished, she will, you can marry her. Right? So he offered everything to the one who was made a brother to him. Abdurrahman bin Auf radiyallahu anhu, he said, may Allah bless you in your wife and your wealth. Where is the market? So he asked him, show me to where the market is. And so they showed him to the market of Banu Qaynuqa. And so he went and he began to earn his own living. Meaning he went to the market in order to work, to earn his living, so he could get married and to make his own provision. So he went, and the only thing he went with was some fat and some aqit. This is like a type of dried milk, like a dried yogurt, dried cream. And so that's all he went with. And after the passing of days, he earned some wealth, and he became married, and then he married a woman from the Ansar. Now, this shows how productive and how determined were the likes of these companions. They didn't rely upon handouts, and they had some nobility, and they had some standing and character. And so this is how they were. So this is the third event, the brotherhood between the Muhajirun and the Ansar that tied and cemented the ties of Iman and Islam. And the fourth event and the fourth steps that were taken were the relationships with the other people present in Medina. And they were the mushrikun, al-Aws, wal-Khazraj, and likewise the Yahud. And likewise the Muslimin themselves, the Ansar and the Muhajirin. So the Prophet ﷺ, he laid down certain points, there are certain treaties or certain agreements, and one of them was with respect to the Muslimin themselves. And we see that when they were in Medina, the Muslims were surrounded by the hostile Quraysh. They would often go on travel journeys which would pass by Medina. And likewise within Medina itself there were the mushrikun who would be allies to the mushrikun of Mecca. So for that reason the Prophet set out certain steps or agreements that Muslims would have a common understanding. And so from those points there was a resolution that was made, which is mentioned in the books of Seerah. And so from the affairs which are mentioned with respect to the Muslims themselves is as follows. First of all, that the Muslimin from the Quraysh and from Yathrib, meaning the Muhajirin and the Ansar, and anyone who followed with them, that they are a single ummah. They are a single nation. The second thing that he mentioned is that the Muhajirun, that they should pay any blood money for their captives, and likewise giving ransom for any captives. This is just an issue between the mushrikeen themselves and the issue of slavery and whatever else. The third thing that he mentioned was that the believers should not leave anyone destitute by not paying his redemption money or blood money in kind. The fourth thing is that whoever is rebellious or seeks to spread enmity and sedition, then the hand of every pious Muslim shall be against him, even if it is his own son. Meaning that anyone who tries to create problems within the Muslim community, then all of the believers will be against that individual. The next thing that was mentioned is that a believer should not kill another believer, nor should he support a non-Muslim in the killing of a believer. The sixth thing is that the protection of Allah, the dhimma of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, and it extends to all of the believers, meaning every believer comes under the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The believers are to be supported by each other. Also that the Yahud, anyone from the Yahud who follows them, then the Muslims, he should not be injured. And nor should an enemy be supported against the Yahud, meaning the Yahud who are with the Muslims and who support the Muslims. They should not be fought against, nor should any other external enemy be allied with against the Yahud, so long as the Yahud are with the Muslims and are supportive of the Muslims. The peace that the Muslims have of the believers is indivisible. No separate peace shall be made when all of the believers are fighting in the way of Allah. Meaning that all the Muslims are together and united in whatever is peace and whatever is war. It's not for any group of people to break off and start we'll make peace with this group and we'll make war against this group. Right? And another group goes and says, well, we'll make peace with that group and war with this group. It's not for anybody. Rather, all of the affairs of the believers are one, their peace is one, and their war is one. Right? So the affairs are collective and they are united. Likewise, from the resolution is that whenever you differ about any matter, it must be referred back to Allah and to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Killing a believer deliberately without any good reason entails killing the killer. This is the law of retribution. If you kill someone without due cause, unjustly and oppressively, then that person is to be killed unless the sponsor deems it otherwise, meaning unless the family or the wali of that person deems it otherwise. So you can see that from all of these things, these affairs, that they were there to cement the community, keep them united, keep them strong, and to protect from outside aggression and transgression. On top of this, the Prophet ﷺ also made numerous other contracts and agreements, and from those were the ones with the mushrikun. And so from the contracts that were made with their leaders was that they should not allow the Quraysh any support or helping hand against the believers, believers in Medina. This was the only thing that he specified upon the polytheists of Medina. As for the Yahud, then there were some agreements which are reported in the books of Seerah, some contractual things that are mentioned in the books of Seerah. And from those things that were mentioned is that the Jews of Bani Auf, they are to one community with the believers. The Jews will profess their religion and the Muslims will profess their religion. Likewise, the Jews shall be responsible for their expenditure and the Muslims will be responsible for their expenditure. If attacked by a third party, external party from outside of Medina, every party shall come to the assistance of each other. In other words, if some party outside of Medina comes and attacks the Muslims, all of the people in Medina will gather together and fight the oppressor. Right? So it's important to understand these agreements, because later on, when we come to some of the wars that took place and some of the justice that was given, it will help us to understand why that was. Right? Because these issues are often used by many of the people who, from the Islam haters, and they try to make it look as if the Prophet ﷺ, that he was out to murder and to kill and to destroy, and this is not true. This is kadhib. And when we understand the various alliances and the treaties and the agreements and the covenants that were made, and how these covenants were broken, and how certain people committed treachery, then we can see a totally different light on some of those events which are used to malign the Prophet ﷺ and malign Islam and to malign the Sharia of Islam. So the agreements with the Yahud is, from them was that if the people of Medina are attacked by a third party outside, all of them shall come to the assistance of each other. So if the Yahud are attacked, all will come to the assistance. If the Muslims are attacked, all of them will come together to fight together. Also, every party will hold counsel, discussion with each other. A mutual relation shall be founded upon righteousness. Sin is totally excluded. Neither party shall commit sins to the prejudice of the other. The wronged party, whoever is the wronged party, will be aided. The Yahud shall contribute to the cost of war so long as they are fighting alongside the believers. Medina shall remain sacred and inviolable for all that join the treaty. So everyone who is part of this treaty, then Medina is sacred and inviolable for all of them. If any disagreements take place between the members of this treaty, it should go back to Allah and His Messenger, and the dispute will be settled like that. Likewise, all of the signatories to this treaty shall boycott the Quraysh commercially. That means all the people in Medina, that they will not have trade relations with Quraysh. Why? Because the Quraysh are working against the interests of the inhabitants of Medina. So it makes sense that this boycott be employed for the interests of the people of Medina. And likewise, they should abstain from supporting the mushrikun of Mecca. Again, keep this in mind, because when it comes to some of the battles later on, and the issue of the treaties and the covenants and whatever else, this will help you to understand and to put into context those events that took place later on. Each person shall contribute to defending Medina in case of a foreign attack in his own place. So wherever they were residing, every tribe or every place, they will defend their part of Medina should it be under attack. And finally, this treaty shall not hinder any party from seeking lawful revenge. Lawful revenge. So these were some of the things that were agreed. So we can see agreements between the Muslims themselves. There were agreements with the mushrikun, and there were agreements with the Yahud. And all of this cemented Medina together, and everything would progress in a safe way, protected from the mushrikun. And Prophet ﷺ continued making da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People would accept Islam, they would come to him, he would purify them, teach them, inform them, instruct them in the religion, and would teach them the book and the wisdom. So all of this took place in the early part in Medina. Now, after this, you can imagine that the Quraysh when they realized and they saw, because news would go back to them from the people of Shirk in Medina, and they were very, very upset. And they knew this was a great threat to them, and also to their trades of root and so on and so forth. And so what they tried to do is they tried to incite people in Medina. So from the first thing they did was to start writing to the mushrikun in Medina, to those who are non-Muslims from Al-Khaws and Al-Azraj, and they began to threaten them. They said, you must fight the Muslims and you must expel them. And they even threatened them that if you do not do this, we will kill you, and we will take your women, and we will fight you and kill you if you do not do this. And so practically the mushrikun, they began to prepare to fight against the Prophet ﷺ in order to expel them. But the Messenger ﷺ came to them, he gave them nasiha, he admonished them, he warned them, and so eventually they withheld from fighting and they took their separate ways. So these kind of things began to happen where the mushrikun of Makkah, they tried to instigate this instability and create problems for the Prophet ﷺ. Another example of this is when Sa'ad bin Mu'adh, he went to make Umrah to Makkah, and he went with a person called Abu Safwan, Umayyah bin Khalaf, and he was someone who was held in esteem by the Quraysh. And he went, so Sa'ad bin Mu'adh went, and they met Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl began to threaten Sa'ad, and to threaten him and to promise him that he's going to do such and such. And he would say to him that you have come to Mecca making tawaf, you're making tawaf by Mecca, and you've come safely, and you've come with this new religion. By Allah, if Abu Safwan had not been with you, you would not have gone back to your family safe. This was like a threat, and it was a clear threat that if someone else came without someone who would protect him, because he had a standing with the Quraysh, then they would certainly have killed him. This shows that the situation was hostile for the Muslims, for them to come to do Umrah, for them to come to do the rites and the rituals in Makkah. So this was a clear declaration of war, a clear opposition to the Muslims, and to repel them from al-Masjid al-Haram, and to fight and kill them if the Quraysh found a way to do that. On top of this, the Quraysh also had some connections with the Yahud of Yathrib. And the Yahud, they would, as we said before, that some of them were allies of Al-Khazraj, some of them were allies of Al-Aus, and they would kindle fighting between them because they would supply them with the arms and the weapons. And so this was an ongoing affair. And they would spread tribulations and so on and so forth. And they realized when the Muslims came to Medina, the situation was not favorable to them and to their interests. And for that reason, there was also connection between them and the mushrikun of Mecca. For that reason, the Muslims had to live and with caution. They would carry arms with them. They would sleep with their arms with them. And eventually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed the ayah in the Quran, Wallahu ya'simuka minan nas, that Allah will indeed protect you from the people. And Prophet also said, Ya ayyuhan nas insarifu anni faqad asimani Allah azza wa jal. O people, depart from me, for indeed Allah has protected me. Because he used to be around Prophet to protect him in case someone tried to assassinate him. And eventually he told them, depart from me, Allah is the one who has protected me. So the point being from all of this is that there were plots and plans of Quraysh from outside to kindle the situation within Medina, either by way of the mushrikeen, the polytheists who were in Medina, or by way of the Yahud. Right? So these two non-Muslim parties were being instigated to create problems for the Muslims in Medina. Now, in this situation, in these circumstances, it is when we see that the fighting became permissible and eventually became legislated. These were very dangerous times, and it was in this period that the verse was revealed, permitting the Muslims to fight and to defend themselves. This permission, so the first it was permission, later became an obligation. it became an obligation for them to fight against the Quraysh. And there are numerous steps. We mentioned the 4 or 5 steps. First of all, the first stage was that the mushriks of Quraysh were considered to be muharibin. They were those who were waging war, because they're the ones who began the enmity and they began the fighting, and so therefore it was a right of the Muslims to fight back against them, and to fight against them and to defend themselves. So this is the first stage. Then the second stage was to fight against those who allied with the mushriks of Quraysh, anyone who united with them and supported them and defended them and allied with them, and everyone who showed enmity and transgression to the Muslims who were not from the Quraysh. Right, so this is the second stage, speaking here about the verses that were revealed in terms of the fighting. First of all, against the Quraysh, permission has been given to fight because you have been oppressed. Secondly, to fight those who ally with the Quraysh and to unite with them and to defend them, and from those outside of the tribes of Quraysh who make transgression. Thirdly, to fight those who were treacherous, those who showed khiyan, who were treacherous to their agreements, from the mushriks of the Arabs, from the tribes in Medina, and likewise from the Yahud, who had an aqd, who had a mithaq, had a covenant and a treaty and an agreement, and then they broke their treatments and their agreements, and so their treatments were thrown, the treaties were thrown back against them, and the Prophet ﷺ was ordered to fight against them because of their treachery. This is the third stage. The fourth stage was fighting those who displayed enmity and transgression against the Muslimin, whether they be from the Ahlul Kitab, from the Nasara and others, and to fight them until the jizya was taken from them. And finally, anyone who accepted Islam, whether he's a mushrik or Yahudi or Nasrani, or anyone who entered into Islam, then his wealth is protected, his life is protected, his blood is protected, his honor is protected. Right? And except unless it is due to a right of Islam. So these were the stages that of fighting and the verses that were revealed over a period of time as these battles took place. Now, the other thing that began to take place, and the final thing that we can mention that began to take place, is that the Muslims were behaving with precaution. Remember, they've just been expelled from Mecca and they've come to Medina, and the mushrikun in Mecca are trying to instigate affairs in Medina. Likewise, they're traveling caravans of trade, and they pass by Medina as well. So for all these different reasons, the Muslims has to take precaution. And because Medina was a new land, they try to protect themselves by going on the outskirts of Medina and looking to see who is passing by, who is going north, who is going south, what is happening, just to gain an understanding of the area and the different travel routes of the mushrikun as a means of protection. So to this end, the Prophet would send some of his companions upon certain missions, upon secret missions, upon expeditions. And so in this period, there were a lot of expeditions, a lot of tasks that were given to the Sahaba to go to such and such a place to see what's happening. And some cases might even be a skirmish or a fight or whatever else. And all of this was in response to the threat of the Quraysh. So whilst we are discussing this topic, I'd like to mention a point which is one of these spite-filled, hate-filled non-Muslims by the name of Robert Spencer. A very evil, lying, fabricating academic fraudster. This is a Christian, but he writes lots of lies. And so one of the things he says is that as soon as the Prophet ﷺ, he went from Mecca to Medina, straight away he started raiding caravans and looting and so on and so forth. And this is just one of the hundreds of lies that he makes. And what they do is they take out the whole history, the whole background context, and they take some events and they present them in such a way to make it look as if that this was just an act of treachery and looting and robbery and highway robbery and so forth, without mentioning all of the background to it. And so when we look at the background and we see all of these threats that were being made by the Quraysh, and all of the instigation that was being done within Medina itself, the sedition, and all of these things, and the attempts to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ, all of these measures were taken as a tactical measure to protect the interests of the Muslims, and to protect the lives of the Muslims, and to protect the situation, the unity that was there in Medina. So, from the objectives behind these activities, these expeditions, these secret missions that were taking place, from them was, number one, what are the movements of the enemy? What are the movements of the enemy? What are the travel routes of the enemy? And in order to secure the borders of Medina. First objective. That makes sense. Any person would do that. It makes sense from a military, from a strategic, from a state security point of view. Secondly, to make it known to the Quraysh that so long as they are threatening, and their behavior is threatening to the Muslims, that we will be on guard. We will be watching your movements and your caravans, and we will try to cut off your supplies and your routes. Why? Because this is the means by which you are trying to harm us, and to send the message to you that unless you make peace with the Muslims, and stop this, otherwise we will continue to watch and to observe and to cut off your supplies and your routes. Right? So to send this message over to the Quraysh in the hope that maybe they will make peace with the Muslims, and they will stop their enmity and their resentment, and maybe there can be some treaties between them, and everyone can continue upon their path. So this was a second objective behind these different missions and these different activities that were taking place in this time. So to send a strong and powerful message. The third objective was to try to make treaties and allegiances with the tribes of polytheists that were living around Medina, right? Who were not within Medina, but to make alliances with them, to send companion out to so and so place and to make an alliance, and to so and so place to make an alliance, and all of this is from a tactical point of view, from a military, from a strategic, political, tactical point of view. And fourthly, of course, the objective is to make iblagh, to convey the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to spread the da'wah of Islam both in speech and in action. Right? So these were the objectives. So from here, there are many of these expeditions which are mentioned in some detail, many of the skirmishes, many of the battles that took place, and we mentioned just a few of them just to finish. So from the missions that the Prophet sent some of the companions, first one was called the Sayf al-Bahr platoon. This was sent in Ramadan in the first year of Hijrah. Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib was sent as the leader, and he took 30 muhajirin with him. And he was sent in order to stop a caravan that belonged to the Quraysh. This caravan had 300 people. Abu Jahl was amongst them. And the two parties met each other, and they were almost ready to fight. But the fighting was averted, and because of someone arbitrated between the two sides. So there was no fighting in this particular incident. A second example was in Shawwal, shortly afterwards, in the first year of Hijrah. This time Ubaidah bin al-Harith bin al-Muttalib, he was sent with 60 horsemen, with the Muhajirin. And they were sent to a place where they met with Abu Sufyan, who at that time was a non-Muslim. And there was a caravan of 200 men. Again, there was some arrow shooting, there was some light fire, but there was no actual fighting involved. A third incident is in Dhul Qa'dah, in the same year, one Hijrah after Hijrah. Prophet sent Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas with 20 horsemen, and they went to a certain place called Al-Kharrar, and they discovered that the Quraysh who had been there, they'd already left. So again, no fighting took place in this instance. See, in a lot of these examples that were taking place, there wasn't actually any fighting. There was no fighting. In some cases, there were agreements that were made. So when you see these people like this kafir, mushrik, or Robert Spencer saying that Prophet went out to Medina and he started killing people and murdering people and looting people and taking this and whatever, all of this is fabrications and lies. The fourth example was a Ghazwa expedition at Al-Waddan in the second year of Hijrah. Prophet himself went out with 70 men mostly from the Muhajirin, and they intercepted a camel caravan belonging to the Quraysh. And but when he reached the place, there was nobody there. And in the process, he found a person whom he made a non-aggression pact with. And in this pact it was said, this is a document from Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, concerning Bani Damrah, in which he established them safe and secure in their wealth and lives. They can expect support from the Muslims unless they oppose the religion of Allah. They are also expected to respond positively in case the Prophet sought their help. This was like a treaty made with some of these people. Another example was the Buwat invasion. Took place in Rabi' al-Awwal, 2nd Hijrah. 200 companions went with the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and they intercepted a caravan belonging to the Quraysh with 100 of the Quraysh. Umayyah bin Khalaf was one of them, and 2,500 camels. There were 2,500 camels. But when they reached that place, the caravan had already left. So again, we see another example where there was no actual fighting involved at all. Another example was the Safwan invasion. And this Safwan invasion, which is when the polytheists, they came to the outskirts of Medina and they raided the pastures of Medina. And they looted some animals. So this is the Quraysh attacking Medina. The Prophet ﷺ, he took 70 men, left Medina, and they wanted to fight the aggressors. And they went, pursued them until they came to a place called Safwan, near Badr. But by that time they had gone and he couldn't catch up with them, and they'd gone out of reach. This incident here was the precursor to the Battle of Badr. This was behind the Battle of Badr. These polytheists came, they attacked Medina, took some animals and fled. And so this was near a place, near the place called Badr, which is a place called Safwan. And so this was the preliminary Badr invasion, which led to the Battle of Badr itself. So again, you can see that there was no actual fighting that took place in this expedition. Others, Dhil Ushayra invasion, between 150, 120, 200 Muslims with 30 camels. They rode and they intercepted the camels. And in this campaign, the Prophet ﷺ, he actually made a non-aggression pact with Bani Madlij and Bani Dhumra. And again, we see there was no fighting that took place here. Also, finally, the platoon of An-Nakhla. This was where it took place in Rajab. Some fighting did actually break out, and eventually when the Muslims came back and the Mushrikun began to criticize the Muslims and say that you fought in those the months in which fighting was prohibited, right? Because the fighting actually broke out in Rajab, which was a sacred month, along with Dhul Hijjah, Dhul Qa'dah and Muharram, in which fighting was customarily it wasn't to be done. So because fighting took place, the Mushrikun began to criticize the Muslims and accuse them of violating this sanctity. And so it was here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed in the Quran, He said, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الشَّهْرِ الْحَرَامِ قِتَالٍ فِيهِ. They ask you about the sacred months and fighting therein. قُلْ قِتَالٌ فِيهِ كَبِيرٌ. Say that fighting therein is indeed a great issue. It is a serious, grave issue. وَصَدٌّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَكُفْرٌ بِهِ وَالْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَإِخْرَاجُ أَهْلِهِ مِنْهُ أَكْبَرُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. But to hinder people from the path of Allah and to disbelieve in Him and to hinder them from al-Masjid al-Haram and to expel the people from it, that is even greater. So, and then he said, وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَكْبَرُ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ. And to make tribulation is greater than killing itself. So this was to console the Muslims, to say that even if fighting is a serious matter in those months, then what the pagans were doing, of hindering from the path of Allah, disbelieving in Allah, expelling people from the Masjid al-Haram, and preventing them from it, this is even greater and more serious in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these were some of the main events that took place at the beginning part in the city of Medina. And after this, this really leads us to the actual battle of Badr itself, because all of these activities and the hostility of the Quraysh, and specifically those events at Safwan and the platoon of Nakhla, they led directly to the Battle of Badr itself. And the Battle of Badr is a great event because it turns the affairs the other way around and showed that the Muslims were given victory and strength over the mushrikun. It was the first time that the Muslims physically and practically manifested their strength and domination over the mushrikun. Before that, it was the other way around. So this battle, inshallah ta'ala, we will look at specifically in the next lesson, over the next lesson or two. And likewise Uhud, because this is where all the battles begin to start now. And so we'll start looking at, inshallah ta'ala, in the next lesson. With that, we'll conclude our lesson there for today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.